Thank you, everybody, for joining. So my name is Ian Sturdy. I work with Eli Lilly and Company. So my presentation is called Leveraging ChatGPT and Statistical Programming in the Pharmaceutical Industry. This is something I presented at Pharmasug in this year in Baltimore. And so the paper is published out there, so you can find it if you want. But this presentation is based off of that paper. So today we'll be talking, I'll just give a brief background on how I came into this project. We'll look at some exploration of programming languages, some code commenting, Whitespace enhancement, some cross-language code conversion, some efficiency boosting through code optimization, some readability enhancement, code debugging, dynamic coding solutions, some big data set creation endeavors, and finally, a learning aid for language proficiency. So let's get started. So when ChatGPT first rolled out, so I started looking at it a little over a year ago, and I didn't really know what to make of it yet. So I heard many opinions on it. People saying it's just a glorified search engine. Other people saying it's gonna generate the most millionaires in history. So, I took that kind of with a grain of salt and didn't really know what to do with it. I just initially started using it for things like to resolve disputes, like during a game of 8-ball, I was playing with my brother, and there's this time when one of the colored balls flew off the table. We didn't know what to do, what the rule was. So instead of combing through the internet, looking at rule books and trying to figure it out, I just asked ChatGPT, and it was able to resolve that pretty much instantly. So we both agreed with the rule that it came up with. Another unusual situation was at my son's baseball game. So of course, parents from opposing teams were fighting over a rare rule that was called where the batter stepped out of the batter's box while the pitcher was winding up. The ball hit the batter. One team thought that the batter should get the base. The other one thought it should be a strike automatically. So I just looked it up on, I just asked ChatGPT what the actual rule was rather than combing through dozens and dozens of web pages or even finding the rule book and finding this obscure rule. So I just asked ChatGPT, and is able to let us know what the actual rule was. Now, the rule went against our team, so I didn't really bring it up. So we just went with what the umpire had called. So I just kept that to myself. But it was interesting, though. It was an interesting exercise. So in both situations, ChatGPT instantly provided clarification without, like I said, having to sort through tons and tons of information online. So I started to see the power in this new technology and the potential it had to replace certain jobs, particularly like customer service or legal assistants, even physicians or pharmacists even. I wondered if it could replace the job of a statistical programmer. So I sat down and talked with it about some practical uses that might apply to us, and here's what I found. So I talk about the exploration of programming languages. So initially, I just wanted to throw out, I just wanted to see what it was capable of. I just asked it to create a simple SAS program. Oh, just a caveat. This is kind of 50-50 SAS and R. It might seem like it's a little SAS first, just because SAS is my primary language. R, I'm fluent in R, but SAS is essentially my primary language. So you might see that. So I asked it to create a SAS program, and I just said, can you merge ADSL with ADVS by use subject ID, calculate some summary statistics, run an MMRM analysis using the change variable, and just see what happens. And so it spit out this pretty basic code. And to be honest, this is sufficient for what I asked it, and it's definitely something we can start with, but it was pretty impressive. So similar, we can ask this to be done in R, and so it does the same thing in R, and here's the code to show that. So it's pretty nicely written code. So like I said, this is an impressive start to create a common output. It's not perfect, but it's a really good start that we can begin with. And so this was done last year. A year in the AI world is an eternity. So it's probably much better now than it was when I wrote this paper. So one of my least favorite activities when programming is commenting code, and luckily ChatGPT has come to the rescue and kind of saved me from having to deal with this task. So um, the prompt that I use is I just ask it, can I send you a SAS program and for you to comment for me? And sure enough, it's happy to oblige. I send it some code. Um, this is an example of what it sent back. It's heavily commented here. So nobody's going to complain that it's short of comments. Um, this is a lot to take in. So don't expect you to look at every line of code here. I just want to see you to see the overall effect. So same thing with R. We can ask it to comment over R code. So it does a fantastic job here. Yeah, so ChatGPT is able to read your code and comment it appropriately. Whitespace enhancement for readability is something that is really important, particularly if you're reading somebody else's code. Whitespace is any spaces or tabs or carriage returns that just clean up the code and make it look nice and readable. SAS has its own, so the prompt that I use is, can I send you a SAS program to improve the whitespace? And so you can see here, the first one, I wrote like a whole program on one line, a data step and then a sort procedure. And so ChatGPT was able to write it out nicely with very good white space. We can do the same thing in R. So the first message that I gave it is just all these dplyr statements all written in the same line. And ChatGPT was able to just add some carriage returns just to make it a little bit easier to read. So I know that SAS and R both have their own functionalities for cleaning up white space. So, there's Control-Shift-B in Enterprise Guide, and there's Control-Shift-A in RStudio. Both of these are good, but they're not perfect. They're far from perfect. And so today, I much prefer ChatGPT's way of handling white space than how RStudio or SAS Enterprise Guide does with their macros. So cross-language code conversion. So the first time that I actually used ChatGPT in a work-related task was I had a SAS code, and I wanted to ask if it was able to convert it into R. And so what it said was that it was able to do that, and that not only that, but it could do the reverse. It can change R code into SAS code. And so that's really what prompted me to think, like, could this really replace our job as a statistical programmer? And so that's kind of what motivated me to write this paper and to try and go down this journey and see what happens. But anyways, here's the prompts. I said, can you help me convert SAS code into R code? And ChatGPT responds, certainly. So here's a simple R program where I'm just, I want to keep some baseline subjects and post-baseline subjects, only those that have non-missing data in either. And so what ChatGPT spat out was the equivalent code, and it's almost one-to-one, like the data step, the sort procedure, the merge statements, they all seem to connect with a little bit of code. So it seems to be really good at dissecting what your code is doing and translating it. So here's another simple example of I'm creating some macro variables in SAS, just in a null data step, and it does a fantastic job here of adding or of creating code that will add global variables to the global environment in R. Like I said, you can do the same thing in R. So convert R code into SAS code. So I'm kind of doing the same thing here backwards that I showed you before, and it was able to do a magnificent job at doing that. So note that things might have changed since I wrote this paper, but at the time, it really helps if you just submit things in chunks at a time rather than just throwing like thousands and thousands of lines of code at ChatGPT and expecting it to come out with perfect results on the other side. So kind of building a solution a chunk at a time seems to be the optimal way of doing this. So efficiency boosting is something that I use regularly with ChatGPT. So what I'll do is I'll send it a chunk of code and see if it can write it a little bit more efficient, and maybe it can save some time. So I'll ask it, can I send you a SAS program to optimize for efficiency? So here's two proc means. One uses the eval variable, one uses the change variable. Obviously not the most efficient because we're using two procedures here. ChatGPT realized you can do this in one procedure, so perfect. Same thing in R. Here I have two steps where I'm using the summarize function. So one for eval, one for change, and it was also able to figure out, hey, you can do this all in the same step. Okay, so and again, the resulting program may not be perfect, but so I highly recommend, good knowledge of either language that you're using is needed, and testing is highly recommended. Don't just blindly throw your results into your programs. So readability is something also that is useful when you're looking at somebody else's code, or when you're trying to understand what a piece of code is doing. So in this case, I wanted to send it a piece of SAS code to optimize for readability. So essentially here, don't worry about the code and all that. I'm just going to give you a short explanation. So essentially, we're creating these macro variables using the macro language in SAS. And so what it ends up doing here is I have a lot of these else if statements all kind of on one line. And so what ChatGPT said is like, why don't you add the do statement so that it just gives it a little bit more readability to it. Oh yeah, and at the bottom of the slide, it explains exactly what it did to kind of make your code a little bit more readable. So again, we can do this in R. So in this case, where I have just a little program that it's kind of messy. It has a lot of if statement, if, else, if, all on one line, and then it's trying to call this other function based on the results of those else if statements. And so what ChatGPT did was just kind of made it a little bit pleasing on the eye, and the reader was able to understand it a little bit better. So again, it gives you an explanation on what it's done to make it more readable. So code debugging is also very useful. Here's a, can you help me debug my SAS code? So here's a simple example where, the classic SAS issue of forgetting a semicolon. So I'll send it a piece of code, and of course it identified that that is the issue. This is a pretty simple example, but we can do something a little bit more complex. So like here in R, I've defined some variables here, and then I'm going to call a function based on the result of those variables. And so ChatGPT identified, well, it looks like you're assigning that plot.type variable twice. And so it's overwriting the previous one. So it identified that and then wrote some code that ends up being better than the original and being correct. So so dynamic coding is also something that I love to use with ChatGPT. So here is a SAS example where I'm saying like I want to write code where I'm going to concatenate multiple variables in a data set separated by a space. Okay, so into a new variable. So I'm saying the variables all start with var, and there are 100 of them. So instead of writing like var1, var2, var3, var4, so I wanted to make it ask it like, can you write the code so that it's more efficient? So what is it able to do here is it use the array statement, and you can just write var1 to var100, and then you can do the concatenation based on, you don't have to write out var1, var2, var3. So it figured out how to do that just by me asking it, can you write code that is able to do this? So the R language, here's another example of, so here so this is an example where, okay, so I have a function that I wanted to call, but, and I say to it, I wanted to use lapply to call this function, but it has two arguments. So at the time, I was probably an intermediate R programmer at the time. And I was like, I want to use lapply, but I have two arguments. So what ChatGPT figured out was, well, why don't you create a list, and then we'll sequence along that list and then call that function with two parameters. So it was able to solve that issue. So I asked it if it could do it another way, and it obliged. It said, why don't you use mapply? And so at the time, I didn't know what mapply was. So this is an example of like a learning opportunity that I could do with, and so I learned what mapply was because of what it suggested. Here's an example where I was trying to get the name of the values of a visit across several BDS data sets in SAS. And so in R, I wrote a program, but it was just, I wanted ChatGPT to write the program for me to try and extract the values of a visit across them. So it gave me this program. I noticed right away that this list that it's of data sets, these data sets are huge. So I was like, this is going to take forever. So I asked it, I said, so sometimes ChatGPT will produce code that is not very efficient or make small mistakes or misunderstand your request. So it helps to know your programming language well enough that you can interact with it to narrow down exactly what code you're needing. So in the example, I noticed that creating a list of data sets might actually be resource intensive given they are large data sets. So because of this, I asked ChatGPT if it could do the same thing without initially creating that list. And so that's what I asked it. I said, is there a way of doing this without initially creating the list of data sets? And it said, yeah. And so it spit out this code, and this was much, much faster. So it didn't need to create that list. So ChatGPT is always happy to accommodate your requests, and it'll apologize if it makes a mistake, and it'll try to get you to the right solution. So here's another example of dynamic code. So yeah, if you have like kind of like the var1, var2, var3 example, like if you have variables that are indexed, like say subgroup var 2, 3, 4, and 5, and then you're referring to another equivalent variable like subgroup 2, 3, 4, 5. So I asked it to if it was able to make this more efficient, and it did. And so in the R programming language, here's something like, if you're using eval parse statements, it's the same thing here where you have the same code essentially, but the name of the variable is just changing, and it's just changing by the index value at the end. So ChatGPT was able to make this more efficient by, and it spit out this list. So using a for loop. So one of the big things that I was working on late last year and this year is, let's try and do this to create code to create data sets, say SDTM or Atom, based on inputs. Like, can you do that? So so I say it in this paper, I believe we could be to the point very soon where ChatGPT will produce flawless code. I think we're there now. So anyways, here's what I, don't worry about all this text here. It's just, this is the code that I added to create an SDTM data set. Here's the code that it produced, which is pretty good. It's not perfect. We could do the same thing in R. ChatGPT seems to be a lot better R programmer than it is SAS programmer. So it produced a lot better R code than it did SAS. So as far as like a learning opportunity, so one of the things in statistical programming right now that is going through the industry is SAS programmers are trying to quickly become R programmers. And so one thing that you could do is ask ChatGPT to create a class or a lesson plan where you would create it would teach you how to become an R programmer based on your SAS knowledge. So, but one thing that you could do is that you could submit like small chunks of code, like say chunks of SAS code, and see what R could produce based on that little chunk that you submitted. So you could send it a data step. It'll say this is exactly the equivalent code in R. And so it's really handy that way that you can actually see. It's not just a big program that you're trying to sort through in R, but you can actually see like in real time exactly what is, how do I write this SAS code that I know very well? How would I do this in R? So just submitting little chunks of it is really useful. Okay, so and sometimes it'll produce code that I wasn't even expecting. Even like as a very, very good R programmer, it'll send me something that I've realized now, oh, that is an excellent way to do things. I'll do that in the future. So yeah, so you recommend like just talk to ChatGPT, just have conversations with it, and you'll be surprised at what you learn. I started using JavaScript recently, and I know nothing about JavaScript, but I was able to start to really learn a lot about it just by talking with ChatGPT. So yeah, and so as I was mentioning before, here's a prompt where can I send you SAS code and have you explain in plain language what it is doing? Here's a case where we're using the SQL procedure, and it's going to create some macro variables based on an input. So ChatGPT was able to figure out what it's doing. And so yeah, you can see at the end, in summary, this code is extracting column names from this data set where the column names contain blah, blah, blah. These column names are stored in macro variables for further use in the SAS code. So that explains exactly what this, this daunting SQL statement or procedure is exactly doing. So you could put it in plain language. So yeah, I started to mention this before, but if you're looking to augment your programming skills, yeah, so you could ask it to create a course for you. And so here is the prompt. You can find my paper later, and all this stuff is in there. So I said, can you create a business course or beginner's course to transition a SAS programmer into R? And so it said, sure, here's all these modules. And then so for each of these modules, you can break it down. And so you can say, can you elaborate on the first module? And it says, absolutely. And then so it gives you some more information. And so, yeah, sorry, it's so this was for module 1, and so now it broke it down in 1.1, 1.2, and you could break it down even further, and so it essentially becomes this tree of knowledge into a course. So and so you can keep going as deep as you'd like inside that tree until you feel comfortable with the material. So another example, I mean, you could create a course to teach you Shiny or R Markdown for the R people. So here's my conclusion slide. So as I went through this procedure, of learning ChatGPT, with the initial intent of like, is this going to take our jobs? Well, so at the end of writing this paper, I figured the good news is that ChatGPT doesn't necessarily have to replace our jobs. So instead, it has the capacity to empower and enhance us and our capabilities. And just, I always say the invention of the calculator didn't put us statisticians out of business. You can't just give calculator to anybody and tell them to do statistics. You still need the expertise. So ChatGPT has definitely made its way to my daily use. And I think it's going to, yeah, I mean, I said this last year. I mean, it's starting to happen. It's potential to launch an innovation era like we've never seen before. And so the key is to be specific with your prompts and not too specific. Be broad, but not too broad. And there's a sweet spot, I figure. So you won't need to worry about judgment from others on online forums like, like Stack Overflow, God forbid you not include a reproducible example. I mean, they'll rip your head off. Well, ChatGPT doesn't judge you. So you don't have to wait weeks, days. I mean, it's seconds that you'll get your answer. So yeah, so I recommend when you start having a problem, just start having a conversation with ChatGPT and to solve it. And it's a powerful tool. And, as far as we've come, we've yet to fully leverage it. It's beyond benefits extend well beyond our imaginations. So with this new powerful resource, yeah, let's become even more valuable statistical programmers than we ever were. And then so I'll just leave it here with this slide. Yeah, I didn't know if we have time for a couple questions, Phil.
Yeah, great talk. I think we have time for about 2 quick questions, and you have quite a few here in the chat box. Did you want to pick a few to answer, or did you want me to just pick them out?
I'll go ahead and pick them out.
Okay, let's just see if we can go fast, and we'll try to knock them out.
Yeah.
Did SAS and R give you the identical results?
So excellent question. Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, have you tried providing a buggy code and asking ChatGPT to find a bug in your code?
I haven't tested it to try and find the bug. I mean, obviously, the examples that I gave in the paper came back and figured out how to resolve the solution. But I mean, yeah, I've submitted it code before and say, why isn't this working?
Next one, do you have to upload the data first?
No, I never upload data.
Uh, and we shared the link to your Pharmasug paper, so that's in the chat box.
Perfect.
We'll also put it in the lobby. Someone said some organizations limit the ability of staff to get ChatGPT. Are you able to get to it from within the confines of your company, or do you have to do this from your own personal environment?
I just do it for my own personal environment. There's nothing that I'm putting on there that's confidential. We can go in this whole ethical conversation about is code proprietary. To me, it's an ethical conversation because I don't think we should withhold code from others in the industry, but that's just my opinion.
Awesome. And last one, what challenges have you come across in working with ChatGPT?
So I think initially it's really difficult to like I guess I need to learn how to speak with it, and that was a big challenge for me. At first, I tried to make it when I was trying to get it to create an SDTM data set. I was talking to it like it was an object-oriented language. So I was like, I would have vectors, like 3 vectors, and each would have 20 elements, and it really had trouble understanding that concept of vectors. And the third element of each vector, they're connected, and I would, and it was like it gave me absurd answers, and I was like, wait, how many elements are in the first vector? And it was like 3, and I was like, no, there's 20, and it was like, oh, you're right, it's 20, and then it kept going back to 3. It was a nightmare. So I learned quickly it is not an object-oriented language.
It's great. All right. Well, thanks, everybody. We're going to transition over now to the talk by Moderna. It is not recorded, so I encourage you to go ahead and jump back over to the lobby and join the last talk for today. Thank you, Ian. I'll go ahead and end this session, and I'll see you hopefully in the next talk.
Thank you.
Yep. See everybody.